Welcome everyone to ASQ section 1106 March meeting. And we have Jay Arthur to be our guest speaker for our second presentation today. And Jay is a well-known speaker, well recommended from many different people. And some of you may recognize a name from QI macros. I know several people in our section have used QI macros. We've had tutorials on QI macros given by practitioners before, and we appreciate Jay taking time to show us some of the tools that are actually on QI macros, but that's not the main topic today. The main topic is about Agile Lean Six Sigma hacking, Lean Six Sigma for results. And I'm sure you will enjoy seeing how to, at a small and efficient way, to be able to make a impact in your company using Lean Six Sigma methodology. So thank you, Jay. If you'll take it away.
All right. Thanks for having me. All right. So unlike most of you, I don't work in manufacturing much. I have worked with some manufacturing companies, but most of the time I've spent in services. So I started in a phone company in 1990 in the IT department. So I've written software for mainframes, mini computers, microcomputers, and we did quality improvement for about 5 years. And because most of my fellow compadres couldn't find a way to save any money, as we discussed in the last section, they shut down the quality department. And a funny thing happened on my way back. When I got to my desk, my phone rang. And the vice president of finance called me up and she said, "Hey, I want you to come work for me." And I thought, what? Because I'd helped her save $20 million in postage and $16 million in adjustments. And I thought about it for a while, but she only had another year or two. She had 30 years of service. I figured I wouldn't get to work for her that long. That would have been fun. But anyway, so then I left the company, did some consulting, figured out I needed to make some tools to help me do some of these charts that were so difficult. So I started cobbling together some charts and graphs in Excel. And then I'd go work with clients, and clients would say, "Hey, where can I get that?" And so the QI macros became a product. And then in 1999, To Error is Human came out, which is about mistakes and errors in healthcare. And just so you know, back then they thought that healthcare only killed 99,000 people a year unnecessarily. I've seen estimates that somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 a year are killed unnecessarily. And the Institute for Healthcare Improvement says that 1 out of every 2 patients suffers some sort of preventable harm while in care. So you guys talk about auditing, and I think, oh my gosh, this is a huge opportunity. There's $1 trillion worth of waste in healthcare, and I'm working on trying to figure out ways to see if we can't mistake-proof healthcare. And yesterday, I gave to the quality management division, I gave a presentation on zero harm, the $1 trillion prescription. How do we start saving $500 billion a year? And so that's actually out on my website and the blog once we get it up there. And so that's something, if you're interested, or somebody in healthcare who might be interested, you can have them come out to our website and we'll help them find it. All right. All right. So I want you to learn a little bit about this Agile approach. Now, I'm an old software guy, and I wrote a book in 1989 called Rapid Evolutionary Development, which is sort of the same principles as the Agile software methodology that came out in the year 2000. But Agile is also based on Lean, right? So, everything comes around. And then Agile became something that leadership teams saw success in IT. And then they said, "Hey, why don't we do that in, HR? Why don't we do it in finance? Why don't we do it blah, blah, blah?" And so this became a way to do that. And over the last few years, I've seen companies that stumble into this approach. And I've been doing it for 20 odd years, so it's not a surprise to me that they came there. I'll tell you all about that. And then how do we do that to start to deliver results, pick the best candidates for green and black belt training, identify the 7 key tools for Lean and Six Sigma success, and learn how to teach Six Sigma in one day and generate results. And for those of you, again, in manufacturing, this is not going to work on your in your manufacturing plant as well. But all of your backroom functions are service industries. Okay, marketing, sales, purchasing, payments, all of that stuff. That's all service industry stuff that can be affected by this approach. So back in 2017 in the Harvard Business Review, this guy said Six Sigma is too complex and time consuming to fit into a regular day. We need tools that don't require an entire organization to undergo weeks-long training programs. So that's just one thing out of Harvard Business Review. So let me take you back in time to the last century. And back when, right, farm employment was going down, manufacturing was coming up, service, ASQ was formed in 1946. And it has largely been about manufacturing quality, right? And even now, I think 80-something% of our membership are manufacturing oriented as opposed to service oriented. Now, the thing that I've noticed, right, is I was in total quality management in 1990. And then we transitioned to Six Sigma. And I don't know about you, if you can see back here, I have a whole bunch of big binders. So I know a little bit about this. But you get a big binder, and then you send somebody to 2 to 4 weeks of training, and they turn in, you get out a green belt or a black belt, and then they do a project. And I've heard this phrase consistently at conferences where people talk about one and done, where people go through 2 to 4 weeks of training and then only do one project. Well, I think you're losing money if you only do one project. And the other thing that I've noticed too is that these projects, 4 months and longer, I saw a couple of consultants talk about their research into how long Six Sigma projects should take, right? And they said, well, it's 4 to 16 months. I hate to tell you this, your leadership team is not going to put up with that nonsense. So how do we start to hack Lean and Six Sigma to get results and start doing it more quickly and efficiently and find the right people to go on into green and black belt training? Well, in my experience, there's a long tail of Lean and Six Sigma tools, many of which you can use more effectively in manufacturing, but trying to teach it to people in healthcare, a waste of time. All right. I had a friend who was a nurse who worked for GE Healthcare, and they used to spend 3 days teaching design of experiments to nurses. And she said, this is ridiculous. They'll never use DOE. And all it does is confuse them. So I think there's a handful of tools that will solve most problems. So let's master those. And then, so where did we go from there? Well, at the inflection point, right, manufacturing is down around 7-8%, I think now, of total employment, but most of America is involved in service industries. And I think ASQ has kind of ignored the fact that this shift has happened, which is one of the reasons membership is going down. We have to find a way to invite people in service into this whole process of quality improvement. And having worked with healthcare, I know that I've talked to a lot of people, and people came out and tried to teach them Lean and Six Sigma or process improvement or whatever you want to call it, but they were using manufacturing examples. Well, in a healthcare environment, none of that makes any sense to them. You have to have language, right? You have to use data that talks to them, right? And I don't think we should be speaking Japanese and Kanban and Kaizen and everything else, because again, it creates a barrier. It's like when doctors, use advanced terminology for the common cold. Let's start to go forward in a more useful way. So here's how I look at the world. On the one end, there are simple problems you can just fix with trial and error common sense, right? Just go fix them. And because where I work with the QI macros, I talk to a lot of people and they say, Jay, we have this thing, but we think we know what to do to fix it. But we want to see if we can apply Six Sigma to that. And I say, what a waste of time. Just go fix it. All right. Plus, you probably don't have enough useful data to figure that out. But there are other problems that can be worked on. And then at the high end, I think there are very complicated problems, not as many, right? But complicated problems. So you might need design of experiments, to figure out the right way to put together your aluminum, right? So that it is a nice smooth sheet and doesn't get wrinkled or crinkled or fail or whatever it is. So these are the kinds of things that are handy if you work in manufacturing and largely unusable, unnecessary in service. And I keep talking to people, and every once in a while somebody will say, "Well, we did a service something in service," and then they can't remember what it was. So, um, yes, you probably can, and no, I don't think you need to. And one of the things I've found is when we teach people things they don't need to know to solve problems they don't have, to impress people they don't like, guess what? They're going to try and take that complicated tool and apply it to something. And they get lost in that, and then they feel defeated, and then they stop. This is not a good way forward. So anyway, I think the vast majority of our problems are uncomplicated, but you need some data and the 7 key tools to figure out what are we going to do with this thing? How do we narrow our focus to fix exactly what's broken and not anything else? And because I was between PDCA and DMAIC, I said, hey, my model was always, well, let's focus, then improve, then sustain, honor our progress, and repeat. And I think very often people get lost in DMAIC. Sometimes they get busy defining and coming up with new measures. Well, guess what? Every company I've ever been to is awash in data, right? And so what you have to do is go find the data that already exists about problems you already have and start there, right? And eventually, if you ever get to the point where you can't find the metric you want or a metric that's usable, then and only then should you come up with a new metric. Because I think otherwise you're ignoring the opportunities that are right in front of you. And that slows people down because they then have to figure out how to start measuring things and count this and not that. And then they get lost. So let's talk about hacking. The spirit of hacking can be adapted and applied to general business management, not just technical innovation. This is a guy who wrote a book on hacking marketing, right? And I think you see a lot of life hacks out there. How to fold a t-shirt perfectly in 2 seconds, right? I mean, hacking can be good, and then we have a lot of bad hacking, but this is how do we hack this in a useful way? And as an old software guy, that word works for me. Now, it may not work for you, but I want you to get the idea. So what I want to do is talk about Agile hacks that have been rediscovered. So in 2019, I went to ASQ1106, the Lean Six Sigma World Conference, ASQ's World Quality Conference, Institute for Healthcare Improvement, National Association of Healthcare Quality. And when we're exhibiting, that's great. But then I go to presentations to find out what people are doing. And so the first one I saw was Christus Health down in Texas. And they had implemented, what I call Big Sigma. So black belts and green belts and starting teams. And the problem was they were not getting any results. And their leadership team said, do you think that you could pare this down into something where you could teach it in a day and start getting results? Now, if you remember Jeff, he was talking about, in his audit, there's 100 things, but maybe 4 things are the things that somebody can actually work on that'll actually move the needle on how they perform. So that's what this leadership team was basically saying, right? Give me something and focus on something that we can fix. And so here's what they came up with. And this is how I've been doing it for about 20 years, and I can tell you it works. So what they did was they selected teams that had a real problem to solve and data about that problem. If you don't have data and you don't have a real problem, you don't get trained. You can't just get your ticket punched and your resume enhanced. You can't do that. You have to have something to work on. And then they would bring those people into a 1-day training, give them training in the few key tools, and then they would apply those tools and principles to their data or problem, come up with countermeasures, and then go implement results and measure how they did. And shockingly enough, they started getting results, right? They started making money and finding a way to save money and prevent patient harm. We talked about patient harm throughout the hospital system. Well, guess what? That was fun. But the other thing that happened out of these trainings was, out of 20 odd people and 4 or 5 teams that were in there, right? 1 or 2 people really showed an aptitude, a desire, a love, a craziness for quality improvement. And guess what? Those people were then taken and sent on into green belt and black belt training to get more skill and knowledge, right? So this is a very different way of approaching things. And I also saw a presentation by Novartis, which is a drug manufacturer. We talked about drug manufacturing before, but they were having trouble getting samples to their sales reps to take to doctors. And so they did a similar thing. They had a 1-day training. And then the second day they worked on how are we going to make sure we get drug samples to doctors, via our sales reps. And they collapsed the cycle time to get things to their salespeople so that they could take things to doctors. They weren't just showing them a brochure, here's a real sample. At another conference, I saw Crayola. Crayola had done the same thing. They'd had problems with Big Sigma. And so they collapsed it down into a 2-day training, 1 day of training, and then another day of actually applying to solve a real problem. They were using that same methodology. And then I saw Underwriters Laboratories present, and because they have 14,000 people spread all over the planet, they developed a 1-day online training, right? And I have a 1-day online training for Yellow Belt that you can take online. So you don't have to build one of these things. I have one of these things. I only charge if people want to take the test and get certified, because I have to pay for processing the stuff. All right. But the 1 day online, 1 day in person to go solve the problem. This is a blended learning idea, which I think we're going to see more of, right? Across the board, we're going to see more blended learnings where you learn something and then you go apply it locally, right? And then I was just at the ASQ Lean Six Sigma conference down in Phoenix, and I saw a similar presentation by Lincoln Financial doing the same thing. So again, pre-work. If you pick teams and you say, do you have any data? Yes. Do you have a real problem to solve? Yes. This is the data about the real problem you have to solve. Yes. Okay. Then you can go to training. So there's a lot of pre-work to set this up so that you get the right people in the room with the right data so we can use the right tools to get the right answer. And then we train teams in the key improvement tools and apply them to their data and problem. And again, with QI macros, it makes it really easy to get people using tools and not be afraid. And I'll show you why. And then have them implement countermeasures, measure results, figure out what's going on. And that's a very fast way to get going. And then you figure out who should really be going to advanced Lean and Six Sigma training, the people who can pick up on that and then maybe start doing more in-depth projects or start working cross-functionally, or, people with more chutzpah and drive to get this done. So let's talk about hacking Lean. Where do I start? Well, you want to shrink the arrows. Now, I will tell you, in manufacturing, most of the machines are right next to each other, and so there's no delay. But in healthcare and every place else, 90% of the delay is in the arrows between steps. So guess what? Do we need to know anything about takt time? No. Changeover time, any of that kind of stuff? No. We don't have to worry about how long a doctor takes to do this or a nurse takes to do that or whatever. What do we need to do? We need to shrink the delays. All right. So in healthcare, we want to make the patient faster, not the doctor, not the nurse, not the anything. Make the patient faster. Because if you've ever been to a healthcare location, an emergency department, you know that you wait a long time. All right. And, I see the same thing when I go out to eat somewhere, and, it always feels to me like if I go to Panera, which I don't do much anymore, it always seemed like they were dreadfully slow from order to production to something else. My local subway is a lot faster and I eat there more. So I want you to get this idea that we can do this just by shrinking the arrows. If you pay no attention to anything but the time in between for services, that'll change things a lot. When I was in the phone company, we used to have a gazillion, sign-offs for projects and somebody be on vacation. So it would take too long to get the approval to go do stuff. So I often just coded it and had it waiting for when the approval came through, right? Because I was twiddling my thumbs some of the time. So that's a different way of thinking about things. And here's a bunch of nurses in one of their training rooms with some bodies there, and they're doing a value stream map. And what I've found is in healthcare, especially because they've never done this, and they haven't thought about it really hard, guess what? We can find ways to collapse the amount of movement of nurses in a nursing unit by 50%. And it does not take that long. So this is a spaghetti diagram of a nursing unit. And this is what it looked like before. That took about an hour. And then everybody talked through why we did things the way we did. And then we talked about how we would revise that whole nursing unit. And then I just sent them off to go change their nursing unit, right? It's right. Let's not talk about it. Let's just go do it. And so then we go do that, and you collapse the travel time by 50%. I worked with one hospital laboratory to redesign how it worked, and we saved like 7 hours of processing a day, which sped up diagnosis, treatment, discharge, all of those kinds of things, right? If we shrink the amount of time it takes for somebody to get their blood test, urine test, whatever, guess what? The doctor can then make an intelligent, informed decision and get stuff done. And we did a bunch of other stuff too. I mean, there's crazy things like they do a nightly run at 3 o'clock in the morning. They wake patients up, draw blood, get them in huge batches. And we all know in lean, that's huge batches are not a good idea. And then they take the huge batch downstairs, and then that has to be put into a centrifuge. And they have big centrifuges, but it takes 10 minutes to spend it in a big centrifuge, not 3 minutes in a stat centrifuge. And so we changed it. So, you draw 2 or 3 vials of blood and you shoot those down, and they put them in the high-speed centrifuge and start getting them into the production of doing the tests. So we did a whole bunch of things to speed up how quickly we could get those things done. I actually worked with one company, it was an architectural company, and their people wanted them to design a lean hospital. And they'd had a number of lean experts come in to help them, and they were still baffled. But I sat there for, probably a half a day with Post-it notes, and we came up with 3 or 4 different designs of rural hospitals that would simplify and shorten the travel time of everybody, patients, doctors, and everything else in that hospital. And they said, well, how do we talk to our client about this? And I said, well, take these poster boards covered with Post-it notes and let them help you design how this should work. They laughed at me, but they went and they got both contracts. So I want you to get this idea that we can do a lot of things very quickly with Post-it notes. Here's another spaghetti diagram, just so you know. So that's how we hack lean. We find a way to eliminate the delays. And so now I want to talk about how do we hack lean and Six Sigma. Well, one of the tools I think is not usually taught is a pivot table to summarize raw data about defects, mistakes, errors, waste, rework, lost profit. And so we can take that and use that to build things for control charts of, what's it costing us, Pareto charts to help us drill down. And that leads into fishbone diagrams, countermeasures, and then we want to come up with control charts with process changes. We can show how to compare Pareto charts or histograms. One of the things that I know from everyone I've talked to is the key step in DMAIC that everyone forgets is the control phase. Because I talk to a lot of people. They say, we made this great improvement, Jay. And 6 months later, it's gone. I go, well, did you put in control charts to monitor it and have corrective action? They'd say, well, no. And okay, you missed a key step, right? There's no sense in improving if you're not going to sustain it. That's just foolish. So, sometimes people ask me, well, Jay, do you compete with Minitab and Jump and whoever the heck, right? And I say, no, I compete with Excel line and bar charts. Excel line and bar charts. So I go to all of these conferences and I look at all the poster presentations, and this includes ASQ, by the way. But what I do is I go through, and anytime I see a type of tool used on a thing, I stroke tally. Well, they used a line chart, a bar chart, and whatever. So I stroke tally and I count all those up, and then I summarize them. So and I've been doing this for about 5-6 years until COVID stopped us from going. But here's the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. They've been around for 30 years, okay? And I've seen Dr. Don Berwick say, I want you all to pledge allegiance to science and evidence. He did that in 2006. He's done it every year since. He's done it in 2016, 20. But invariably, these people are still using line and bar charts. And they started to get some control charts and fishbones in 17. Magnet Conference is a big nursing conference. Bar charts and line charts and pie charts, 83% of the total. Now, I consider line and bar charts for quality improvement to be, these are the three stooges of charts. They will not help you focus, improve, and sustain. They just won't do it. And this is the National Association of Healthcare Quality. Bar charts and line charts, 75%. They started using a few run charts, but there's not much out there. And I see this at ASQ as well. So I think you probably all know this, but I'll talk about it anyway. What's wrong with line charts? Well, these are, again, this is a type of urinary tract infection. Somebody sticks a trend line on it without a goodness of fit metric, which in this case was 30%. And instead of doing that, if we'd have drawn it as a control chart, we'd see one out of control point and a stable process. So there was no improvement. And I can't tell you how many times I'm wandering around through these 500 odd poster presentations at IHI, and there's somebody there taking a picture of an improvement project with one of these dumb charts on it. Like they're going to go back, like this is the holy grail, and they're going to go back to their hospital and implement this and waste all this time. So very disappointing. And what's wrong with line charts? Another one. This is another type of hospital-acquired infection. By the way, hospital-acquired infections are a common thing. All right, so here we see the R-squared is 53%, so that's a little better. But if we did a control chart of that, we can see there was a before and an after. So we went from about 9 down to 5. That's great, right? So we can prove that this actually happened. One time I was right across from the Baldrige examiners when we were exhibiting at a conference. They said, a lot of people come to us for the Baldrige, but they show us the before, but nobody shows us the after. Well, if you can't see the after, guess what? How do I know you made an improvement? So, and I think all of you know this, that we want to get into using control charts and histograms and Pareto charts. This is where we want to go. Now, one of the things I want you to think about is most of the data I see in most organizations is overcooked. And what do I mean by that? It's been over-summarized. Now, I could do lots of things, but this is healthcare. This is deaths over artery graft surgeries, okay? But when you summarize that by quarter, we can't go drill down into each one of those deaths and find out, did it happen on a Monday or a Friday? Was it a certain age of patient? Was it a certain whatever, right? We can't learn anything. So there's no way that we could go in there and do some root cause analysis, which Duke's great at, right? But, right, without some raw data behind that, we're not going to get there. So I'm going to invite all of you to go on a raw data diet. And I know in manufacturing, you have lots of raw data about things like scrap, other kinds of waste. So you could drill down into that. So here's our raw data minimum requirement. You need to know the when, the where, and the what happened. All right. When, where, and what. Now, if you know how much or who or why, guess what? You can probably get more information out of it. So if you have data like this by hospital, by admit date type of denied charges, well, there's our when and our where and what and how much. And if you do that, that could be worth $5 million a year. Now, we also use this to reduce 24 million in rejected insurance claims. Now, rejected ones just hit the insurance company and bounce off, right? But you got to imagine what you want is for your insurance claim to just glide through, right? And so we found ways to reduce that. So rejected claims would eventually get through and get paid or denied. But in essence, they didn't lose any money, but it was money delayed. If you have data that looks like this, you can see where this is type of machine, what type of scrap code, description, how much scrap was lost. That was worth $1 million a year, right? And very often I see data like this, but nobody knows how to summarize it and drill down in and figure out what's going on. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. So very often people talk about low-hanging fruit, but I've found that most of the low-hanging fruit has already been picked, right? And all of the, I call it this stuff, invisible low-hanging fruit. This is where the big money lives. Every multi-million-dollar project I ever worked on started with data that looks like this and a pivot table. So we need a little data mining wizardry. So we're going to take this raw data. We're going to use some pivot tables to summarize it. And the great thing about you summarizing it or I summarizing it is that we can drill back down into the detail. And then we're going to turn that into control charts and Pareto charts so that we can actually, do the drill down. So let me talk about the healthcare improvement story, because I think this is very illustrative, and I've done other similar projects, but this one really talks to the nuts and bolts of how this works. So here you can see we had denied charges, denials, and that was $1 million plus a month. Well, you might imagine that in a hospital, you could do something with $1 million a month. Half the hospitals in this nation are in the red. Half. And you look at we're spending $3 trillion on healthcare, Jay. Well, yeah, and we're 26th in the world in quality of care. And, but all these people are running in the red. How can they run in the red? Well, medication errors and all kinds of other things, right? All of these things. But this is just about not getting paid for what they did. So many of you are familiar with, the Pareto rule, popularized by Duran. He always said he wished he'd named it Duran's rule. And I think that's a telling statement, right? Because it got a lot more traction, but it didn't have his name associated with it as much as it could have been. But 20% of what you do produces over 80% of the waste, rework, loss, profit, patient harm. So, but the thing about this is this is a power law. Within that 20%, the power law still applies, which means that as little as 4% of what you're doing is producing over half the mistakes, errors, waste, and rework. 20% of 20% is 4%. 80% of 80% is 64%. So I want people to get this idea that you don't have to fix everything. Just like Jeff was saying, 4 things. If you fix those 4 things, you're going to get most of the bang for the buck out of this audit, right? 4 steps out of 100. That's 4 out of 100, right? And so I always say that 1 step out of every 25 creates 50% of the waste, rework, loss, profit. That is the $1 million misstep. You do not need to fix everything else. It's a waste of time, right? It's a giant waste of time. I want to find data that helps me drill down and pinpoint exactly what is broken and where. And so when I do that, then we can figure out how to make the most progress. I worked with one company that made colostomy bags on an assembly line, and we used some data like this. And in the course of a one-day training, we figured out what exactly was going wrong somewhere in the assembly line. And they figured out a way to save $90,000 a month. That's in a one-day training, right? Using the tools and looking at their data to get the outcome. This can be done. So then, I was doing pivot tables manually back then. So I came up with a control chart, and then I started drilling down. Well, it turns out the biggest cause of denials was for timely filing. They weren't getting it filed in time. I forget, there's 30 days or something to get these things filed. Well, then what you want to do, this is what I call the 80-20 level Pareto, right? This is the high level Pareto. And so what we want to do is drill down into timely filing. And with pivot tables, you just double click on the cell that has that $7 million in it, and it'll bring up all the data behind that. And then we can look at that data to drill down into there. So what I did was do that. And so here you can see when we drilled down, one insurer was 64% of the total. Remember I said, 80% of 80% is 64%? I had to laugh when I saw this, right? It was exactly the one thing that we had to fix. Now, the one thing that happens when you do this is it narrows your focus down the point where your fishbone diagram is not going to be that complex, right? This is just this one pair and some other things. And so consequently, that makes it super simple to fix. And they came up with two countermeasures. One was to change their process, and the other one was to go back to the insurance company and say, hey, you're not living up to your contract, right? And because everybody else doesn't have that problem. And for the next, once we implemented that, and again, we took maybe 3 hours to do root cause analysis and countermeasures on a Friday afternoon. On Monday morning, they implemented the process changes and then started working with this company, but they cut denials by almost $400,000 a month, $5 million a year. They went on to do that other things around this and save even more. So I want you to get this idea that if you have raw data like this and you can go look for things, you can save a lot of money. Right. So I did that with an aluminum manufacturer. I've done that with E470, which is the local toll road that runs through Denver, Colorado. They saved $2.5 million out of their $22 million budget. I think there's bunches of money sitting out there, right? But as we were talking about earlier, nobody wants to air their dirty laundry. No manager wants to admit that they do not know how to fix this problem. They do not want to share their data with you because you might make them look stupid. No, you're not stupid. You just don't know how to analyze this data. You don't have that problem-solving toolkit, but I can teach you how to do it. So here we go, world-class improvements. I like to see control charts, couple level Paretos or histograms, and cause and effect diagrams, and a before and after control chart, and comparing the Pareto charts or the histograms. Now, one of the things about me is I used to do this manually, but because I am a geek, what did I do? Well, back in 2016 and 17, I decided to see if I could automate all this in the QI macros. If you've never seen the QI macros, we're an add-in for Excel. It does control charts and Pareto charts and fishbones and so on. And we have stat tools, lean tools, and all kinds of junk in here. And at $329, it's very affordable. You can buy a lot of these. Plus, it's super easy to use. So, what I want to show you is here you have by date, by packaging line, folded flaps. Now, this isn't actually, I worked with Miller Coors on things like this. This is in their data, but I want you to get this idea. I've been around all these different environments, and there's money. There's money. All right. So what we would normally do, or I would do, is I'd go in here and say insert pivot table, and then I would start figuring out how to count the number of defects, and then change the pivot table to do Pareto charts, and change it to do more Pareto charts, and drill down, look at it 7 different ways. But in 2017, I decided I would start doing that, and I'd rather have it automated. Now, it took me several months to do it, but I did. So what we're going to do is take 2 headings here, date and line, and click on the Improvement Project Wizard. Now, the Improvement Project Wizard will chunk through all of your data. And I will tell you, I used to try and teach people my strategy for doing this, but unfortunately, it was, again, it's a little hard to learn, right? It's like a lot of things. Until you do it a few times, you don't know how to make it work. And I don't know if you remember back when I did my first quality improvement project, it was an epic fail, but I learned a lot about how to make epic failures. But but since then, right, I said, well, let's see if we can't come up with ways to make it easier. So what it did was come up with a control chart and 2 projects. And at the high level, there's an 80-20 rule for project 1, and then it drilled down and created what I call the 450 rule, Pareto. And then based on the big bar of the 450 rule, it created a fishbone diagram, and here's the problem statement. And it did the same for the other one. So I'll walk you through the charts it created here. So here's our packaging defects by line, by date. And then it drills down into by line, which line has the most packaging defects? Line 3. Okay. And then within line 3, it drilled down into line 3 and said, okay, which one of these is the biggest problem? Folded flaps. All right. And then it would spin up a fishbone diagram that says during 2020, folded flaps accounted for 39% of line 3 defects. So that's one way. And then it keeps looking. So it went at it the other way. Defects by line, folded flaps, bent and damaged, carton will not open. Those 3 are 67% of the total. If you fix those 3, guess what? You're going to save a ton of money, time, and effort. You know, as I was fascinated when I was at the Miller Coors, right? But they have issues where, you know, cans are underfilled or whatever. And so those get bumped. They have to be drained. And you can't actually put beer into the sewer system, so it has to be processed, right? But they had these big 4x4 by 8 foot blocks of crushed aluminum cans waiting to be recycled. And I thought, man, let's see if we can't figure out how to save that. Anyway, I wander off field. So folded flaps, bent and damaged. If I drill down into folded flaps, line 3 was 79% of the total folded flap defects. So at this point, right, I'm going to come up with a fishbone diagram, but I know who should be on my team. I would like you to consider that you do not know who should be on your team until you've done this analysis. By now, I know I need people in line 3 to know something about folded flaps. That rules out a lot of people. I don't know how you were taught when I started. They said, well, you just get people together and you brainstorm some problem to solve, and then you go start to collect. No, let your data lead you to a real problem that exists. A real problem that exists. All right, so that's something we can do automagically, right? And you're not going to find that anyplace else other than in the QI macros. Now, that's enough of me advertising about that, but I want you to get this idea. Can we automate more and more of what we do? And I believe we can. And how do we hack Six Sigma training? We don't have to teach people formulas or how to use a calculator, right, to calculate formulas. I spent 5 days in a class, 4.5 days with a calculator. And I did not learn a single thing other than how desperately impossible this was going to be to teach to the people in the phone company, right? And I saw one nurse said, you know, they showed us how to draw a control chart and QI macros, and then we spent 3 days doing formulas. Well, that's dumb. The formulas are baked into all the software, right? We all use the same formula. So you don't use mine or you use whoever. you're going to get the same formula, right? So people don't need to know that. And I also dislike the idea that you need to learn decision trees. So I was at one of the IHI online presentations in December, and they started talking about, this was SPC, and they started talking about, well, you have to know if your data is attribute or variable. And the chat room just lit up, right? And everybody started typing in, well, this is where I get confused, and I don't understand. And so, of course, they're already lost. So that makes it difficult. So what did I do? I took this whole decision chart tree, the basic ones, and I built it into a control chart wizard. So in the QI macros, unlike anybody else you'll ever see, right? If you select data with your mouse, most everybody else asks you to pick the chart first, then pick your data. I ask you to select the data first because that's how Excel did it. And I didn't know anybody else's stuff. And so I wasn't, tempted to try and follow in the footsteps of other people. But if you do that and you click on Control Chart Wizard, the Control Chart Wizard is going to look at that and go, multi-columns, decimal data, that has to be an X-bar R chart. And so here's our X-bar R chart. You get this idea that, and here's what happens. I used to try and, before 2006, when I created this, I used to spend time trying to teach people how to choose the right control chart. Man, they'd get confused and concerned and worried that they were wrong. And oh my gosh. But when I do this, I take people and say, select your data with the mouse, click the control chart wizard. And they just start drawing charts. And they don't know it was hard, right? They don't know anything about anything, right? So they can just start doing it. Now, later on, I can, if they say, well, why did you choose an X-bar R chart? Well, then I can whip out my handy little decision tree and show them how to got there. But it's much easier to teach them at the end after the fact than it is before the fact. So this teaching people things about how it got there after the fact is often much easier. So that's a little bit about that. What I think people do need to learn are the patterns they're trying to achieve, right? Reducing variation, moving the center line down, so reducing defects or patient harm, increasing patient satisfaction or viscosity or whatever it is. That's what they need to learn. And I think the same thing is true in histograms. What do we want it to do? We're trying to move it on target. Or it's too much spread, we want to teach them how to reduce the spread. Right? This is not complicated. And in healthcare, we want to teach them how to reduce the cycle time to 0. Right? How long do any of us want to wait for patient care once we finally go see a doctor? 0. I'll tell you that. 0. So why do we need to pivot now? Why do we need to start applying this methodology to service portions of manufacturing and to all the service businesses out there? Well, I believe that if we don't figure out how to fix how we're going about this, we're going to become extinct. And if you watch the downward descent of ASQ membership, you get an idea, right? That somehow we're missing the boat. So anyway, Agile, Lean, and Six Sigma, small Agile teams using data to really get things going rather than Big Sigma, wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling, right? I can get people going quickly. And once you start getting some momentum and some results, then management will pay attention, invest more in the program. So there's a lot of ways to go about this, but I think the traditional one has led people astray. So a lot of people are still at gut feel, common sense. Some of them know how to collect data. A few of them are starting to learn how to analyze and improve. And, let's create a hassle-free America, hassle-free healthcare. I call these people money belts, people who can actually use the tools of quality to save money, time, patience, lives. So this is where I think everyone can get to. And I think we can train people to do that easily. So let me go back over here to out on our website. If you go under our free training, I have a free yellow belt training, right? If you want people to just go to training and you don't want to have to train them, send them out here. I have a free Agile Lean Six Sigma trainer training to teach you how to do what I do, right? We have QI macros video tutorials. We have things to help people practice QI macros for healthcare and manufacturing. Here's our yellow belt training. And you can see here it's things like we have different case studies. We have manufacturing health studies and healthcare case studies and so on. So I cover a lot of the stuff people need to know, the 7 basic tools. There's the Agile Six Sigma trainer training. And if you go out to our website, qimacros.com/agile, here's a presentation I gave to healthcare. But if you go out there, you can actually download my Agile Lean Six Sigma ebook for free. And I think that's it. Yeah. So, Agile process innovation, hacking Lean and Six Sigma for maximum results. So if you want to read more about this, right, you can go out to my website to do that. And let's see if I can. So I'll put that link in the chat box for all of you to get to. All right. So lots of ways to learn how to do these things on our website, because I can't train everybody. It's not possible. So this was kind of a high-speed tour, and it's probably a lot to digest, right? Especially because it flies in the face of almost everything you've ever been taught, that we can do this in one day and get results. That'll help us identify the right people for green and black belt training. And that Agile companies are figuring this out. This is where they can succeed when traditional Lean and Six Sigma implementations have failed. And some key tools, and learn how to teach Six Sigma in one day and generate some results. So that was a high-speed tour. What questions can I answer for everyone?
You can unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself and ask questions.
And you can reach out and talk to me on my website at j@qimacros.com. And these are links to the book and to my yellow belt training. So let's not all be quiet now.
I can't believe this group will be that quiet.
Well, I think they're processing. I tend to throw a lot of information at people, and it's a high-speed tour, but well, gee, that was easy. But anyway, everyone can reach out to me at j@qimacros.com or give us a call. We're actually in the office nowadays, except for today because of snow. And I'd be happy to talk to any of you about this. And if you have data you don't know what to do with, send it to me. I like to see people's data and see if we can't figure out what to do with it. So I think if you're struggling with anything, and I think most of you are all skilled professionals, but you have lots of people out there that need to learn how to do pieces of this so that you're not the lone wolf running the quality department, right?
Yeah, Jay, this is Duke. I'll just say that a measure for me is how often I use QI macros versus how often I use Minitab, and the ratio is phenomenally towards QI macros, because it's the simple tools, that'll solve the majority of problems.
Thanks, Duke. High praise from one of the people I really love and respect in this community. So. All right, well, we still have 5 minutes, but since nobody's talking.
Very good. I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll stop now.